So someone end up with the how much from my subject on the show now? How much for my subject on the show now? Jackie subject on the show now, doing the food to show now. Those in the Jackie subject on the show now, doing the look to solo shadow now, how much for? Lasso, any some of the just that and drinking the sugar, conjugal the get on the shoe, looked at the Sanjay looked at the Chibote, Uzo Shujoji, and one of the Dozibatos, Lotu, she does in a Kushana.
Since that time, any it's mostly your context. Slowly you will move to get good. You know, even though I told you this morning that the Tibetan language came from Viveki, Jahane, Ongarade, in a Natuki, Katam, Betara, Jal, Sudeni, Jahane, the Natuki, Shetu, Yongare. And another Purdia, any Chilakshe that the Russia, we had no skill whatsoever. And a lot of young people died because we were not used to Indian food and diet. So slowly Tibetans were put up in the foothills of Himalayas to work on the only thing we know was hard labor. So your grandparents, my parents, they worked on road construction in the Himalayas. And slowly, Tibetans were resettled in compact communities like Balakubi, Gongsu, Golegong, and Orissa, the Shijamangoya, Tinjunaonia, and Rimbedushi, the Shijazu, and Labdazu, Ongatsu, Luxeche, and Kureki, the Yasachi Tuve. Temado, Pene, Galomshi, Shibunami Sambala, Galomshi, Niene, Galomshi, Jedi, Michi Gaze today. Michi Gaze, today India is 1.4 billion population. Those days it might have been 500, 600 million. So today, Puvachi Gedi, and it's millions of them those who are taught everybody would have been speaking Punjabi or Tamil or any other language that we are located in India. That's how to show the Mazuki and in issue the Sing generation. The Tibetans who arrived from Tibet, they took up the responsibility under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, I am the second generation. In that sense, we are born in India. I have not seen Tibet, just as many of you. Chuyugan Panzuki, Pyoga Shedi, Nepalage, Pyoga Dunshiri, Amlage Dunshiri, and Trombanzuki, Pyoga Shedi, some other Yendi, Chuyugan. Pyoga, Commission Tachi career, Mikaba Gedishi, Buzu Haiku, Mikaba Geshi, is that the little Bilwa. Deep no treasure. She's not being in it. Not doing this one, and Mikaba Geshi is made this food the days of Yendi. Digital to do, not the television, Yomare, things on the Google map, and they Yomare, then you saw some imagination number, and a bird and a Kalushi, some teddy or what. Then you got Tanama Dream of the Genki or it. That DG, Pivot, Mutin, and against you kill. I was killed. Mahoma Sikong to a transnational Tonga. Mahoma Chibu to a transnational Tonga. And council began catching not long on the touch of the mood in the net area, as mentioned, or attained. When a Mambo Chimu than a Mambo sharing a chicken of George and Gabana, that would in it, she didn't get basic information about Tibet. There's a shame where the administration way. We have come out with a vision paper. This cabinet, for the first time, had come out with a written vision paper. So if you go to Tibet.net, you will get to see that in English as well as Tibetan version. As to this vision paper will give you a sense of direction as to where this cabinet is planning to take our movement and our community forward into the future. Dinamone, Tangudine, Kadune, Diko de Shigyu. Tangu Pawai Bechane, Matusan, Pawai Sane, the Samuchi Buguyare, and then Povach Buguyare. Providing some poverty manner, and gain cable somebody So if you know that you are a Tibetan first and that I have a responsibility towards my people, then you will feel that you have to understand Tibet more. Right? So today I'll provide you with some basic information on Tibet. So the sharing this one that Tibet is not only important only to Tibetan people, but why it is important to the world or for the world. The global significance of Tibet. But Tambudi in geostrategic importance to share the location for why it is geopolitically relevant and important, not only for the Tibetans, but for the region and for the whole world. What do we call ourselves? I'm showing you the country is Sayama, Kamanima Laba, China. This is one of the Shanding, Geographic, Shabbat, Chedon, the Shanding Guru, Shanding country, Shabbat, over Shingan, business in the Guru, Deep Unanolia, career over Shingan Dina, Injinanolia, Tatadina, Ocean, the heavenly abode, the land encircled by snow mountain ranges. Completely Rabba, Kosha, Rabba. Why do we call it the land, the heavenly abode? the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. And next map now, the Tongre, the Quebec, Provala Caribbean, Chiche. Then even since the end of 16th century, Westerners, Europeans, started coming into Tibet. Jesuits, missionaries, the Christian missionaries considered Tibet as the last frontier where Christianity could not penetrate. We are all Buddhists, and Tibet is surrounded by snow mountain ranges, so it's not possible for people to come into Tibet very easily. You have to climb up so many mountains and down valleys and up and down. So there were no motorable roads, you don't have airplanes those days. So it's very difficult to come into Tibet. That's also the reason why Tibet was protected by its land and its structure. Next slide. I read a lot of travelogues by those missionaries who came to Tibet. So now it's available in English. Those days it was not available in English because most of the missionaries wrote back when they came to Tibet. They wrote back to their churches in Italy and other countries in Europe, and those were in Latin. They did Latin now. Latin is being translated into English, and we have access to people who have traveled to Tibet in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century. Roof of the world. Roof of the world. Roof of the world. In the south, you have the Himalayas. Himalayas are the highest mountains in the world. And in the west, you have the Karakoram mountain ranges. In the north, you have the Kunlun ranges. And in the east, there are so many mountain ranges. So Tibet is a land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. But then why do the Westerners started calling Tibet the roof of the world? It's because of Tibet's altitude. This is the roof of the world that we are. The reason why they call Tibet the roof of the world is because the average altitude of Tibet, the average, it's about 12,000 feet above sea level, or in terms of meter, it's about 3,700, 3,800 meters above sea level. So the last time I was in Japan, everywhere I go, I try to speak to students in universities. So lately I've been covering a lot of universities. In England, I covered Oxford University, Westminster University, Aberdeen University, and I spoke at the Warwick Economic Summit as a Warwick University. And in Ghana, I started speaking to colleges in Bangalore, Mount Carmel's College, all girls college, one of the most respected or prestigious college in women's college in South India. And then you also have St. Joseph's University, Ramaya University. I spoke in Bangalore in 3 universities. Last time I was in Colombia, I spoke at 3 universities in Colombia, 5 universities in Mexico, several universities in the United States. Now we have to cover more ground to reach out to younger generations who can understand Tibet more. Because sometimes we believe that people know about us because of His Holiness popularity. But then we realize that they don't know the basics about Tibet. And we talk about a lot of higher things, which doesn't make sense to people. So that's why we talk about the basics. Did you do that group of the world that is this is not a map written by hand. But these are all satellite images. And you can see how Tibet is high from the Bay of Bengal or from the Kanyakumari, from the Indian Ocean side. When you take a picture of the plateau, then it rises by itself. The Tibetan plateau was formed because of the tectonic shift between the Gondwanas, which is the Indian plate, and the Eurasian plate. So the plate, even now, scientists say that Tibet Himalaya is growing by 10 millimeter every year. And tectonic shift. All these places are very vulnerable to natural disasters like earthquake and all that, because the plates are still moving and it's still being formed. The roof of the world because of Tibet's altitude. Right. The next slide is there. Then today you will hear, this is another map of how high Tibet is. Then another next slide is showing here, the altitude there. And when I was in Japan, I spoke to students there and I asked them, which is your highest mountain in Japan? Japan is Mount Fuji. Mount Fuji, the altitude consists of East Tibet, and 3,700 meters, 3,800 meters. And I told them, your highest mountain, the highest mountain in Japan, or the highest mountain in New Zealand, called the Mount Cook, which is almost the same altitude as Mount Fuji, is like base camp in Tibet. That gives them an imagination as to how high Tibet is and why people call Tibet the roof of the world. The next slide is the Tibetan plateau ki permafrost. Today, environmental scientists, Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet the third pole. The two other poles are North Pole and South Pole. Now, why do they call Tibet the third pole? Because Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds the 10 major rivers that flows into 10 different countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia. It shows the amount of glaciers and permafrost on Tibet. So it's compared to next to the North Pole and South Pole, Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost. And then the size of Tibet is almost equal to Nunavut here in Canada. Nunavut is about 2.5 million square kilometers, and Tibet is also about 2.5 million square kilometers. And that's about 1/4 of China, right? 10 times the size of the UK, 18 times the size of Japan. Pakistan journalists which is bigger, Bhutan or Tibet? And Bhutan is so small, right? Tibet is very big. So Tibet is also referred to as the third pole. Right? The heavenly abode land surrounded by snow mountain ranges, the roof of the world, the third pole, and then the next slide will show you how many rivers originate from Tibet and flow into the neighboring countries. Environmentally speaking also, it's very important. Next slide. You can see these are the Nalola, Pune, Gangdela, and the Dibindu, okay. The Gangdela River to Yellow River. Yellow River and the Yangtze River, the two rivers are the lifelines of China. If it is not for these two rivers that originate from Tibet, they cannot support 1.4 billion people in China without that water that originates from Tibet. And Yellow River, by the way, is also cradle to Chinese civilization. Chinese civilization is one of the oldest civilizations in this world. And Chinese civilization was formed on the banks of the Yellow River. The Yellow River flows in the north of China and the Yangtze flows in the south of China. 이 Canada 최신이 되는 연구도와 이 개신국 그거 작용을 하고도 하여튼에 if you come to this the Mekong River is also one of the longest rivers in the world, and it originates from Tibet, from Kham amdo the Khamne Maya Muyore. Khamne any Ma Dosa de Mungana Ruyore. It flows into 5 different countries: Laos, Burma, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam. Mekong flows. Right. And Mekong is the lifeline for these 5 countries. Then you also have the Salween. Salween, the Thailand and Burma border parallel to here. Right. Then you have the Irrawaddy that flows into Burma. Right. That's name Brahmaputra. The point when it takes us, that place where Brahmaputra flows south, that area is called the Great Bend. The Great Bend. When the Brahmaputra flows from western Tibet, comes to eastern Tibet, and then takes a south turn towards India. And China is building a dam that's twice the size of Three Gorges Dam, which is the biggest in the world. Three Gorges Dam, Canada. Now this dam at Pemaku is supposed to produce, it's twice the size, which means it's going to inundate a lot of land upstream. Until it destroys the unique flora and fauna in that region. And this dam is supposed to produce 3 times the hydroelectricity than the Three Gorges Dam. So it's going to be the biggest dam in the world. And as I told you, the whole Himalayan region is a seismic zone. It's prone to earthquakes. If something happens to that size of a dam inside Tibet, what is going to happen to people in Arunachal Pradesh in India and into Assam and into Bangladesh? If the Chinese government is really serious about reincarnation, then Chinese government should study Tibetan Buddhism first. Because you have to believe in the concept of life after death if you believe in reincarnation, right? So, if the Chinese government is really serious, they should look for Mao Zedong's reincarnation first, because Mao Zedong died long ago, right? And Deng Xiaoping second, now maybe even Jiang Zemin, he is no more in this world. Then maybe the Dalai Lama was. That's what His Holiness, that's how His Holiness used to respond in a manner that His Holiness does all the time, right? So these days, when His Holiness keeps assuring us that He will live for another 2 decades and more, or that His Holiness will live up to 113 years of age, there are propitious pre-signs that this Dalai Lama will live very long. And just before coming here, I attended the long life prayer to His Holiness. Then I tell our Chinese friends, this message is for you, because you guys are waiting for this 14th Dalai Lama to die. And His Holiness keeps assuring us that he will live for another 2 decades or more, or up to 113 years of age. So the message they translate us, because you are waiting for this Dalai Lama to die. Right? And His Holiness keeps saying that I will live long. So I keep telling the Chinese, let us see whether the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party, or the Communist Party outlives the Dalai Lama. I go around the world. In the last 2 years, I traveled to some 24 different countries, from Far East, from New Zealand, Australia, Japan to Europe, India, Europe, and North America, South America. For the first time, we managed to go to Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. My predecessor, Dr. Lobsang Singh, had gone to Mexico, but not beyond that. So it was a revelation for me because every visit to any country for me it's a learning experience. So now Brazil has no idea about what Chinese government is doing. So I told them, Brazil is the Amazonia, right? So I told them the correlation between the Amazon environment and Tibet. Even though we are on two different parts of the world, there is a scientific study which talks about the influence of Amazon over the Tibetan plateau or vice versa. When there is more rainfall in the Amazon, there is less snow in Tibet. When there is more snow in Tibet, then there is less rainfall in Amazon. This scientific study, they looked at climatic conditions over many years and how South America, then Africa to Middle East to Tibet, how it relates to each other environmentally. And when I met to Mexico, in fact, Mexico the biggest trading partner for Mexico is US. But they hate the US so much because of immigration problems and border problems and all that. That's why they go to China and they do trade with China. Now, China has become the second largest trading partner of Mexico. So I was telling the Mexicans, because they don't have a clue about what the Chinese government is doing. So it's very important for Mexicans to understand what the Chinese government is doing around the world, not just to Tibet and East Turkestan and Hong Kong and all that.
Sorry, I lost my voice.
It's okay.
My question is kind of general. But since Tibetan youth, we are like the future generation and the leaders in Tibet. What is your vision and your kind of wish for how our future relationship with the people of Tibet and with China are?
They are aiming at destroying the identity of the Tibetans, including language. You must have heard about the colonial-style boarding schools in Tibet, which is not exactly the same as the residential schools for the First Nation people here, but it's very similar, aimed at destroying the identity of the Tibetans. So now in these colonial-style boarding schools, they give education in Chinese medium. So you have only 4 classes on Tibetan in 1 week. Only 4 hours in 1 week. And how much can you learn? The rules say that in the nationality regions, the nationality language should be the prime language. But the rules say something and they do something different. Jadi tandai kana shung phe nang la siju simen de phebe ki miri khora sama tayanish ta tanda nganju ki mi di phebe ki miri ki ngod how do we preserve our identity phe nang la yong so ba nyang ga tu yor de they are doing everything possible to counter that, right? Even tuition classes are not allowed to be undertaken in Tibetan language during the weekends. 진짜게 또 뷰 그런 싸면 땅 뷰이 매우 쇼바이나 아니 표바되겠지 상황 표백 현재 your age your generation inside Tibet 개미민규디 현재 상황로 개미부분의 신수에 it has a lot of other implications, geopolitical, security issues for India and all that. But for us as Tibetans, 먼저 표바라는 게 미리 노순급 제약랑 강의 책이도 와. When we travel around the world, I make it a point to meet with the younger generation to tell you how important the Tibetan language is and why you need to study the Tibetan language. This is language chiku keja mare, tangi gojudu shugana shinchin tanda nganjo generation ki genki giyare, maungba kyanso genki gori mado chigi shama genki suchi yomane. Mexican ji yonje bebe genki maro. Canadian 지원의 배배 genki고 나도 배가 나는 배배 genki고 왔는데 먼저기 현재 초래야 니주제야 아니 내 지금 고수협의 통안에 아니 involved China 소수기 니나로는 준 다단다 슈도 랭귀지 WeChat that is not China. You know what to speak to politicians, you know what to speak to media, you know what to speak to think tanks. Then you some the capacity building thing on the Shukchumbu Sotuna. And if the Sino-Tibet conflict is not resolved immediately, if you look at the policies of Xi Jinping today, it doesn't look very likely that there would be a resolution very soon. But at the same time, we are dealing with the Chinese unofficially. Okay? But what is important is for the diaspora Tibetan community to stay together. Even though we are becoming physically distant, we should be emotionally closer. Right? And Dharamsala is too far away from this, travel half the world. But still, even though we are physically becoming distant, we have to be emotionally close. So if they want to get involved, they have to understand what is going on inside Tibet. They have to understand. That's why I keep reading every night some 6, 7, 8 articles on China, on Tibet, on international politics that impacts Tibet. As long as you are informed, you are on top of things, then you can talk to people with confidence. Sometimes we believe that, oh, we are too diffident. We think, oh, we don't know that much, But now I know that I know much more better than many others around the world about Tibet and China. That I can tell them what is exactly happening in China or Tibet. And people are willing to listen. And people are willing to learn from us. And we should take this opportunity for, if you all are informed, well informed about Tibet, then you all become advocates for Tibet. So it's not just only us, myself or Namgyela or the Tibetan Association, and every single one of you become ambassadors for Tibetans inside Tibet. And that's what we should work for. You will become more confident. I can stand with any leader in this world, shoulder to shoulder, and speak, because I know the things, what I'm talking about. If you don't know, then you feel diffident. Confidence poverty 단다 만들 둘이 삼바는 딱 내주 소수 뭐 개가 되는 게 둘이 삼바는 남자 콘성 만들때 망한 신임에로 선데 콘성 만들 수게 되지도 가르쳐 because they are not informed about the immediate things that has been happening in Tibet. We are the ones who have this information. The Zoom advantage learning, and that's how we need to reach out to the world and tell them exactly what's happening and what we want them to do for us. That's why, even on this issue of independence middle way, focusing on the historical status just by talking the talk is not enough. But we have to walk the talk. That is why Namgyela has been working along with ICT in Washington, D.C., with the US Congress over the last 1.5 years. And we managed to now pass this bill in the House with a super majority of 393 members out of 431 members in the House. Now we have reached halfway. The very reason for me to be here in Toronto today is to be in Washington, D.C. on 15th and 16th to push this bill in the Senate. Once that gets passed in the Senate, first we have to go through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and then once the Senate Foreign Relations Committee takes a decision, then it goes to the Senate floor. So it's two more steps. So if it gets passed in the Senate floor, then it has to go to the President for his exit. Then it becomes a law. So once it becomes a law in the United States, last November, Namgyela and myself and CDC Executive Director Sherab Kharchim, we were all in Ottawa, and we met in 2 days. We met some 26, 28 members of Parliament and 4 ministers in Ottawa. And I told them, once this bill gets passed in the United States, we are going to come here to push this. And when we push it here, then we all have to work together. Every single person's effort makes a difference. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nangla keja madiche del trai mo.
정로 예민되는 세상에. So, my question is, I know our government and your campaign before promoted the middle way, right? But when you go when you go internationally to talk to government officials, do you expect them to follow the middle way as well? And if not, or if so, how do you expect them to support our Tibetan purpose? That would be my question. Thank you.
So there are two things I always say. When it comes to Sino-Tibet conflict, the resolution can come only by dealing with China. United States cannot give autonomy to the Tibetans. You can't expect NATO to interfere, to seek a resolution for Tibet. So the only way is to deal with the Chinese government. Now, till such a time that we are able to seek a resolution dealing with the Chinese, we have to reach out to the international community. There's no choice. Right? When we reach out to the international community, we also have to bear one fact in mind, that everybody is concerned about their national interests. 계급 수인의 수수수 개변 강못당들이 만들지기 계급 심화 개변 따그만 배반에 인해 배반 전ing지에서는 뒤지고 따그만해. First is national interest. Now the thing is, how do we align our interests with that country's interests? So when the alignment of the interests comes together, then it produces better result. So when we reach out to the Canadian government also, we have to tell them how it benefits the Canadian government in terms of how we are advocating and what we are telling them. When we reach out to the Americans, we have to tell them how it's important for their national security supporting the Tibetan issue. And when it comes to India also, it's the same thing. Because right now, India has problem with China, because China's belligerence on the Indian border is giving a lot of problem for the Indians, right? So we have to align, when we speak to governments, we have to align our interests with their interests to seek their interests and support. And that's how we need to reach out. Right. That's a bit short answer. Of course, we can speak longer, but there's no time. So next one.
Mr. Sikong, my question has...
당기 그냥 두 번에. right. 던듯이 안에 오갈게 나왔어. 이 제일 수요일, 열배. 니도와. 야, 조고 있나.
Mr. Sikong, my question has to do with the Tibetans living in Sichuan and Qinghai. The Chinese claim over Tibet says that Tibet has been part of China since the Yuan dynasty, and in my opinion, that is not true. Central Tibet and Bhutan was not part of China ever. However, the Tibetan areas of Qinghai and Sichuan have been under Chinese rule since at least the Yuan dynasty. So, how does the Tibetan government in exile justify its claim over the Tibetan areas in Qinghai and Sichuan?
Throughout history, every nation has its relation with neighboring countries. There have been incursions, there have been wars between neighboring countries. And the same thing happened with Chinese and Tibet. Right? When the Manchus started coming into Tibet, that was in 1720s. And that is when Qinghai and the Sichuan, part the east of Tishu River, became, in a way, separate, not under the Ganden Porang government or the central Uzang government, right? So they became separate, but that also does not necessarily mean to say that they came under Chinese influence, because they were autonomously managed by Tibetans. Qinghai was Amdo region, right, including Nangchen today. Kamgi Nangchen zo이는 Qinghai yore. 아니 Amdo 강강 Qinghai yore. 이네 디나는 표현으로 심대요와. They may be paying some tax to the Chinese authorities, but administration is done essentially by the Tibetans. Then again, you have this parallel of the local chieftains and the lamas, right? And when it comes to the grassroots administration of these bodies, if you compare the chieftains and the lamas, lamas are more powerful. 가서 남한도 세대신이 있잖아요. 십대도 메시지고로 네 인도사만 남한도 원체요. And all these lamas are linked to the central monastery in central Tibet. Udang, Sanglayo, Sajainere, Kajuinere, Ningmainere, Giluinere, Tambu Tasad Unin Tarwa. Then it went to other periods. So these are parallel to the Sanglayo, but just because those areas were not part of Kandepuram government for some time does not necessarily mean to say that they are not Tibetans. Because the Chinese law says that if it's a people who live in contiguous territory with the same culture and language, they are the same people. Right? Again, history now. In mid-18th century, East India Company came to India. They invaded India. But in 1947, 250 years later, India became
The Toronto people are trusting of Nito de Cartulana Damazo, Buchiga, Gabli Jab, Gomba, Dr. Jab, and Mancon, Arimato, Sanju, and Javanichi, and Samaju, the church of Stacho, Animato Muni chapter, that chapter, refugee channel, Lumo, Dadalo, the children as Duore, Dada in the Pocono, Pimus, Camariore, Ani Kalagurana, Animato, Mama, Jar Buchito, Zenshu, Pujang, Longshop, Ronzera. 단다에는 자른 붙이고 공시 조 예전으로 자체 동작을 인편 루미랑 거 당아서 전신 보정 거 롱셔때 루미랑 인디zambal아니 루미랑 같은 칼라고래 단다 니몬 붙이기 루미랑 지나 아니 나가 데디야리스 아니 지 칼라고래 지 자른 붙이도 아니 지 스총 보정 된다지 지 자그래지 아니 루미랑 같은 아니 지 실락라 자미라 Just Zoe Maris, Chikalo Jamila with the color lingit and a bebayana, that Chimtukio Maris, the Dinda to points Nanga Lingipin, Chimati Church, the Maron, Popasim Bichani, Maron Gay or then the Zambalamaron and Marongi, Draw Musum Bitani, Aye, Salakataba, Toronto, Janos and Zambola, Shibigoni, Jaramuchi, Gongere, Maron, Longshop, Tavarongi, the Ubola, Romont, Pokana, Jaramuchi, Gongere. Coincidence, Miss Chivan did not choose Jima de chapters at the Jawi Chapter, then the Tambala, Marongi Kitani, Simbala, the Dutch Mompujima, and the Latin. Ani not under Bala, Lingipen, the Ani Marongi Palamala, the Ama Mela, Kakuzuri, Balanya, Pojichazuri, Maroina, Danda Pogna, Amdonga, Zurgini, and Danda and Dalu. Nitong nishi sabshi go cheda nipagi poko losa ki tare jela ani ngi amal mala gantra bichante nolola dirora sura ani ngasu nolola nyetapa and the lessons ani churongi pogate shijalamba la yore ani churongi pogate ga ani khardina gatu pola leya ki corona topa yuna ani ngasu gi nyetapa police office gi Fantang Shanda, any visa table, the Dama Amag Lapson, any Kuransuki Mala, not the blanket Jura, the Dutch Teslas Amag, Cardinal Churon Pogola, Sarbala, Taji, Nimbado, the Chitano Lapkatura, any Carson Chida Sumbagi, Tare Siva Jet, Jilani, Me, Bala, Amala Lam, the Hala, Kalagori, Kontugi, Bala, and the Lapsi, Churongi, Bogate. 시절랑발라 아니 그 삭바든데 좀 고트는 다니 리카야 부자금에도스 렌디다말 아니 데라 칼라고레 아니 데라 콘솔라 말라 텐달랍샤니 노메레나 다티스 지 강아도 쳇디도라 에나다 티 제동가다 메데 저런 보미 사이트다 시청 임비차니 찹시 돈데로이 비토니 아롱기 데데지라 인토송 아니 젬바치 카르라나 마토기 나도 참아 잡혀봐라. 아니 나도 참아라 지금. 보거나 시 강아리오레, 로몬 고기오레, 보거나 드미 톡통 고기오레, 대인지 잠발라 보거나 단다 니통데 되게 차대오레, 대인지 잠발라니 단다에는 니통이 스탑지고 제다니바 세와 드리 칭이라 아니 암동아와 충천니 보고 지와 아니 코로나 직잠 코로나 지직 동래 아니 그런 게 지가 나올라다 또 그러려나 Jacob Mesa, Jacob Chicken Olola, Gotten Suma, Zimaris. And the Vanoshigo, boom, Mazu boom, Murikundi, Jana Mukinola, Mpunoshis, the Dindajin Kron Genji, so the Kron Jeda, Dig Jeda Simba with the Richin Kron, that Jamie Nitapaki Kron, so much Jisha, Dindajin Kamario, De Masi Danda Yansha Nimakashis, Amdunava, Yudigumbala, Anitawa, Kron Man of Bema, and Kron Java Buchingo, Drapanchi Kurna, Matu Dawajana, Shibi Lingipena. Koroina danda kanya tisha dinda ka chikche de yore dendi dambala matsugi ramon ba de dino la chik sabat ro mo chik chik ani sabat na ni chik khala boba ge nong la chik khala ni do chen chingoni ge matsugi sabat na jakap tom mur ge matsugi chapchu le de matsulang genchen yora jar mo chik danda ro bola dendi shi gore bola oni ge derche ge nyama chik shar gu yona dinda ge goni matsu Lingir Katsima Pena and Tiji Perry, the Nasan with the Mazu, Lingin Sapa Momots, the Din Sapati, Boba, the Nola, Chick Tumbo Chai, the Dragon Yanka Chini, Maroni, the Jig Tonti, and Jibai, Shantibai, with Sapa, Masiora, Tinoloni, Monigo, Cardanda, who Jona Nishimana, Sapata, Monigo, Jacob, and Murigi, Yamatapa, Linki Pay, and the Dayo, Danda, Jona Nishinola, and Sapata. Chapsi, Jandri, my Sapata Soyon, hello. Ding you the Chitak Shapshed and the Jig Chap or did a Jig in the Dilani, Jonga, Kare, just another teaching.
That to a Tomadi, sweet,
좀 쉬어요. 단대차다 constitution building 벽이 다리 술록되나 이게 진로 되는 last change and 당랑 또 티워디 시에 되지는 않죠. 아니 당랑 또 이나 추제가 너무 좀 재미니 나 고치 수비와 나랑 이 다시 크리시엠바 냠뇨 크리 총바 소소라 크리 다 총들 없어 소소라냐 고갑대 크리 말아 다 부주 총만 소라라나 된대징랑 기 계르기 다 수술 내가 주소 고관 영화와 차와 당하와 농다 세 주소주다 차가부터 보고 소는 얘기 꼬딩 진짜 TV로 아니 꼬딩 진짜 대할 레벨 개침 나랑 계르기 소비도 한슈나 예 마다 마자베 로고 망고치 다 레고 레가 네 마트 내가 쇼부기요래 한슈나 랑구기 추고 다다 오토메이션 망고 요구요와 근데 코딩이 보고 소라 실제 유대의 고에대 할 레벨 개chu지 말한 게르기 시디요 테나손다 탄탄가서 데르루토 랑토랑 나로루토 니슈짱 아니 코딩 진짜 티에 고급 청소 프랑스 탄다 로나 고드 로나 줍시 파 탄다 푀다 제외기 고치 망고치 쓰다 수신바 인스티슈에 타티니 탄다 슈에디 마셈사 치슈도 가와니 고도 슈나 탄다 야가나 쇼베 부주 추마출라 또 프랑스라디 아니 보급디 유엔나스 탄다 롭세기 삼보데 롭체 나라 롭세 템베 나라 아니 탄다 추제스다 오딩기 아니 롭세디 템베 나 유엔나 단단한 차시디 가원내 유나 안디지 소로나다 티 지워디 뭐만 로야니 지워디 꾸리 총소 안디 야 단대처라 가원내 유메디 시마소 안디 꾸지 맞라 말 소로나다 슈이미라 아니 따따따티 부츠기 단단 꾸치에서 단 유튜브에 프랑스 배다배된도 서다 수시로 있는 진슈이 빠디치
Just say, Sikong. First of all, I just want to say I thought your talk was really insightful. I want to say thank you for that. This is relating to what you were saying about us feeding the dragon as in Western culture. I was curious, how do we, from a Western perspective, move away from our dependence on China's economy? That we depend on so heavily for like the cheapest phones, all the iPhones are made there. Everyone I know that's my age has ordered something from Amazon or Temu or whatnot. One strategy I can think of off the top of my head is like raising taxes or tariffs. But the problem with this is that they're still getting our business and the dependency is still there. Are there any alternatives that you can feed to this problem? Thank you.
this English, the control should among the control to the actually. And that Ukraine is the Uma, that is some of the language bear Yada and the give us roachik. Today, Kashik that the Ume is Siju Goma Suni, Shigi Yorba. The ones who don't understand middle way or who want to discourage middle way, they speak about those things that, oh, if you follow middle way, Umalia Droina, Pajit Dengue, Umare, now dead in a degree, and not Sintigo, now dead to it. Not Sikong, now Uma Victoria, Ashigyorba. She's a nan yan demido. She's a nan yan demi, another person or Chikorba, Uma touching as someone. In some woman you make you touch you, but the Pejudan. We use our minds to explore how do we gain leverage for middle way. So it's not like, if you follow middle way, you just stay at home and don't do anything, don't do any protest, don't go to Chinese embassy. If you burn Chinese flag, the Chinese government use it to tell the Chinese people that the Tibetans are burning the national flag of PRC, which again, we create more enemies. You do it in the right way, send the message across. That would hurt the sentiment of millions of Chinese, and then we create more enemies instead of supporters. I think you some of that intimate show is that Pernano Quran de Sundu Samano de video get there. I was not sure whether then the live to the video live to work. Like the Quran Sundu, some of Quran and the Pernal, as you saw, dear Kuta. Wherever I go, the Chinese government is watching all the time. As I speak now, they are listening because all are going live. He got up and he came here. This is my Yamna some land. Quran Chiwada Pagana Chiwra. This is the Kodupe engine and Yamna for the Gurda, Tamulam Sanko Chukman. Yang Bemoyorda. They're watching everything, wherever we go, whatever we are speaking about, they're always listening. So this is another form of reversal of transnational repression. Because the Tibetans who are outside here, they try to put pressure by saying if you go and protest, then you will not get visa to go to Tibet. That's the ultimate weapon of the Chinese government, not to grant visa to go to Tibet. And the Chinese government always try to entice people to come in to Tibet, influence them, pay money or use influence, give them visa, do something so that these people will turn around and then be favorable to the Chinese government. That is their expectation. But we know that this doesn't work with everybody. But there are Tibetans within the Tibetan community who loves money. So not all Tibetans are the same, right? Then you do some of same and Tanda Pernano the Shiva, this way, that Pernano Lokashek, we know, address someone in here. They try to get address of every Tibetan who is living outside Tibet who are related to Tibetans inside Tibet. Then they tell the relatives inside that if you don't ask your son or daughter or your brother, sister, whoever that is, in the foreign countries, not to be active. Active Chevaina, you guys inside Tibet are going to suffer. That's how they use, the reversal of transnational repression. The Talaprang Sumba Demare, as you have worded, and she had the Bunishin Sigurs. When it comes to the United States, they always say, oh, United States is not treating us equal. But when it comes to Canada, does the Chinese government treat Canada as equal? Never. Even with India, they don't consider India as equal. Right? Although everybody is an independent country by themselves, whether you are big or small, and China never does that. One important thing that you spoke about, there are too many organizations now in exile as for a community, and all these are becoming divisive in many cases, not doing the things that they should be doing, not focusing on what they need to do, but doing other things that creates more problem within the community, whether it's to do with regionalism or religious factors or whatever. So you young people need not. So the council, just leave it aside. So spiritualism is up to the individual as to what you want to do. It cannot be forced on anybody. Right? Whether you follow this particular tradition or that particular tradition, it should not become a point of conflict. Right? We don't have even a handful of soil in our hand or land in our hand. And what do we fight for? Right? First we have to seek a resolution. And when we get to go back to Tibet, then we can talk about other things. Even me as a Sikong right now, when I think about possible solutions for Tibet, I think about all the 3 provinces, not just one province. That's why I also say, since we came into exile, this 14th Dalai Lama managed to create an identity, a Tibetan national identity of all the 3 provinces together, despite the question that came from the other gentleman who asked the second question, which is very relevant also historically to understand our perspectives. That is why I keep saying you have to go back to history and understand all those things. So these organizations, whatever is coming up, should not be a cause of divisiveness. They should be focusing more on what they need to do for the common cause of Tibet. Right? I can't swear that. On did it. The key that you got is was the can you might land the trouble to do. That's the shame. So, of course, the Labana, you understand it. So all we are trying to do is to create a common curriculum for all the schools under TCB or homes or Samboda, but the one that you're dealing with, I'm not sure whether it's there, because you're talking about 9 to 14 years old. But if it's not there, these are some things that need to be introduced.